we're sort of getting at something here. I wanted to ask you about um, socialism, the left, and the road to socialism. Okay, so socialist movements of the 20th century, that was really, in a lot of ways, depending on who you ask, the zenith of socialist struggles. Okay, like, they struggled to change the relations of production, more egalitarian relations. A focus on those manifested in socialist states. Across the world, across the global south. But of course, we know this history, the collapse of the USSR and reform in other parts of the socialist world sort of resulted in a downturn, in the popularity of socialist ideas globally. On the other hand, the capitalist system is not eternal. It is a world historical one. I mean, emerged at a particular time under particular circumstances and conditions. It is not going to stay this way forever. I mean, that's dialectics, that's Marxism. But and that system will change and transform. It needs to, but that transformation process is slow and spans, multiple lifetimes. I think it's funny. I remember once you said socialists are, exiles from the future. I found that very hilarious. But we're getting at this. This is a weakness of the left, in the imperial core in particular, I guess, per my observation, to not be able to take sort of a long historical view of transformation, right? Multi-lifetime. So the question here is, taking this historical long transition view of the global shift from capitalism to socialism, we have to make that happen. What do you see as the tasks of the global left today, after facing major setbacks over the past 30 to 50 years? Socialism as a term, at least in the imperial core, is not as, popular. And, even Zoran Mamdani calling himself a democratic socialist, emphasizing the democratic there quite a bit. So, in other words, for socialists or communists today, where is the socialist horizon? How do we orient around it? And how does that inform, what is to be done today?
I mean, the thing is that the world is really in a difficult situation. Yeah. We have a kind of culture of cruelty which has become completely normal. Hunger is something that is acceptable to so many people. So many people believe that it's okay to spend more on weapons than to eradicate poverty. And that's a culture of cruelty. That's the normal culture. We are at an enormous disadvantage as the left. We're going against the whole tide of culture. Rational intellectualism has taken a beating. The academy is filled with people who are specialists, unwilling to come out there and speak for the generality of humanity and so on. That has really harmed our culture, our societies. The fact that this enormous intellectual class in the North Atlantic region has basically taken a job and has disarmed itself immediately. Said, "Well, I'm a specialist. I deal with 18th century X." And these are brilliant people who understand how the world should work and so on. We need them to be more vocal and to stand up for the values of humanism, which ground their entire profession. I mean, at least in its historical form, they have just absented themselves. Millions of intellectuals absented themselves from the debate and allowed right-wing zealots to basically command the space and say, no, wait a minute, we need weapons because there's dangerous people at the gates. The lack of the debate is really disarming for the left, for socialism. You can't build socialism unless you're able to make the debate, and come there and say, hey, wait a minute, we don't agree with this. Who's dangerous? If crime rates really risen? I don't think so. They haven't. What's the threat? What is your threat assessment? If you bomb Iran, the Iranians will come back and attack you. But if you don't bomb them, if you negotiate with them, they are reasonable people. Yeah. As the debate goes in South Asia, is Pakistan a Westphalian state or a failed state? I mean, this is a ludicrous debate. Yeah. Most human beings would like to have a rational debate and say, look, I'm not interested in the conflict. If you're on the street and somebody just excessively with a belligerent personality wants to, rumble with you, other people will intervene and say, hey, take it easy, guy. That's how the world works. There's a lot of people who want to say, take it easy. It's called the United Nations. Yeah, we got to strengthen the United Nations. All of this is moving towards building near a socialist agenda. Right now, the socialist agenda is really a social democratic agenda until we push the gates further and see the class struggle intensifying. Right now, most of the things socialists are talking about, eradicating poverty, peace, development, these are basically things that if there were social democrats in the world, they would be fighting for. They don't exist. Yeah, they've become neoliberals. So we are forced to do their historical mission. We are not, there's no space for us to say, let's intensify the class struggle. Yeah. Then you'll be sectarian out here saying, I'm not interested in solving the poverty question. I'm intensifying the class struggle. Okay, you may be right. That's what Marxists are supposed to do. But right now, our historical mission is basically being shifted because the social democrats and liberals have vanished. You see a person hungry on the street, you can't just say, "Hey, listen, there's a liberal behind me. He's going to feed you." I'm building the class struggle. I can't solve your. You can't do that. You're a human being. You got to say, how do we feed these people? How do we fight for soup kitchens and so on? That's the problem with socialist politics today. So when you say, "Oh, Zoran Mamdani, he's a limited social democrat," but so are you. What's your agenda that's so radical? How are you able to intensify the class struggle by yourself? The tempo right now is not moving in that direction. So don't lecture Zoran Mamdani or myself and say, you guys are just like liberals. Well, yes, because they have absented themselves. So we have to fight against hunger and we have to fight against illiteracy and so on. Yeah, we have to fight in this terrain until sufficient numbers of liberals are back on the field, social democrats. Then we can go and say, I'm against the politics of social democracy. I want something more radical than that. Unless the people are on the streets, strikes and so on, you can't just stand there and say, hey, go on strike. Right now the class struggle is defined by the bourgeoisie. The owners of property are the ones who are driving the class struggle. The workers are not. That's the stage of history we're in. So I can't stand on the sidewalk like some mad person saying I've been communicating with aliens. Workers go on strike. The workers will look at me and go, man, I'm a Uber Eats guy. I got to go deliver the food. Can you just make room for my bicycle?
We are in the end game of capitalism. And I don't mean that it will be over in the next 10 years, but in the next decades, I think will certainly this century will be in this end game. And I think that, well, the basic situation is now that the imperialist core has lost its economic superiority, and it's in the process of losing also its financial superiority. And this is two very important factors. It still have its military policy, which is still strong, but it's also losing its soft power, its cultural, its moral superiority, especially the Gaza war have been an eye opener for many people that of the hypocrisy of the West in their so-called moral superiority. But this So what the imperialist power in this end game has changed from neoliberal globalization, in which the competition was economic, ruled by international institutions and all kinds of the so-called rule of order. They have moved into a geopolitical, primarily military struggle. And in this geopolitical struggle, yeah, they try to control the gateways between the massive production areas in Asia and the consumers in the West. And these gateways are going on the land in the north. It's going from Asia to Iran, Ukraine, and into Europe. And in the Middle East, it is the control of the Suez Canal. It's the control of the oil production. So this is two points where this geopolitical struggle is going on at the moment. And of course, these struggles are very important, and the outcome of it will have some kind of impact of the transitional process. But there is this understream and undergoing process, which is very, very strong, which is that the global north, the imperialist power, is losing the economic battle. And if the world doesn't go into some kind of nuclear world war, which I certainly does not hope, then I think that this economic basis and this economic understream will determine the impact of the transitional process. So what I hope for is that we can make this process within the coming decades without a war. But we should reach a turning point, I think, at least around 2050, if we are going to avoid this climate collapse. If we don't reach it at this time, I think that this socialism which we have to build will be some kind of lifeboat socialism, trying to pick up the. It would be very difficult to reestablish the balance with nature if we don't reach some kind of turning point around 2050. So that's why I think it's very, very important that we are prioritizing political action in the coming years, every one of us, because we on one side we have a unique opportunity for change. The whole system is unstable, and what the actor do is very important. And on the other side, if we don't make the transition, we are in a race against time. It will mean a catastrophe. So it's very, very important that all of us do our best in the next decade, because else it will be very, very. We will have many regrets, and it will be difficult to look ourselves in the mirror in the midst of this abyss of a catastrophe, and say, "Oh, I shouldn't have done this and this." So I think we are on a very decisive point in history.
Yeah, I think actually socialism is on the march, if I can use that terminology. I'm not a member of any political party, so I'm not supporting any party whatsoever when I say that. But I do think China is a exemplar of emergent socialism, what is referred to by Torkil Lauesen as the transitional state. And the transitional state is a socialist state. So, for instance, if you were to read the work of Lenin or Mao, some people who say they're Leninists or Maoists or Marxists, they want read their work, and in a moment they will not. So, for instance, people laud the Communist Manifesto or the Manifesto of the Communist Party, to use the right term. But do you really want to read it and follow those rules or those dictates? So one of them is dictatorship of the proletariat. And once again, as I say, it's not a walk in the park. It's, it means that you have to fight against the bourgeoisie. So I actually think that China is heading in that direction. And, they do call themselves a dictatorship of the working class. That, if you ask any leader from Mao to, including Deng Xiaoping, who was reviled by many for a period of time, and maybe still too today, but less so. And I think Xi Jinping has actually, done has made incredible progress cracking down on corruption, you know, actualizing the defense of the working class in the country. Now, of course, things are not perfect, and they never will be anywhere. But one can certainly say that the working class in China has far more rights than the working classes anywhere in the world. So I would say that, first of all, if one were to read Lenin or Mao on what the socialist state should do, this is after the revolutions, not before. They believe that the most important thing to do is to develop industry as well as technology. And without that, they're not going to go anywhere. So they're saying, well, and actually Deng Xiaoping said this. I think that Xi Jinping is a great leader. I may not say that about Deng Xiaoping, but he did say that, we can't have equality amongst paupers, really, right? So I sort of agree with that. I think that one of the greatest aspirations at the foundation of China was to actually recapture its greatness that it had at the beginning of the 19th century. And that's the same for India as well. If you take a look at these Kondratiev style maps or timelines of recession and so forth, the depression, but also with respect to share of GDP, you'll see how it contracted so much in the global South under imperialism, colonialism and imperialism, and subsequently contracted even more over the last decades. So many of I think the serious socialists would say that we need to develop our state. We need to establish a state that is capable of serving its population and vice versa. And you can't do that after a civil war, let's say, as they did in both countries so there are many things, but many doctrinaire Marxist-Leninists who are friends of mine would probably get very angry if I were to say this, especially in India. I have a lot of friends, so I hope this is not transmitted there. I don't know. I don't really care. We have those debates there. I'm referring to non-revisionists, people who say, well, the apogee of the Soviet Union was between 1917 and 1953, 56, the Stalin era, 1924 and 56, Lenin Stalin era. And then the other one would be Mao era between 1949 and 1976. And, they think that the greatest thing that ever happened is the Cultural Revolution. I think you may know who I'm talking about, those types of people. Yes. And they despise China, and they despise the Soviet Union after 1956, the 20th Party Congress, when the de-Stalinization took place. Now, I'm not saying anything I think Mao was a great leader, and I'm not going to say anything about Stalin, I'll get in trouble, but he also was an important leader and contributed to defeating the fascists at the very least. But I'm not going to remark about him. I don't really, there are some complications with respect to Stalin, but they're the same with Mao. If you read a lot of the literature, it's the same. Mao was a dictator. He killed tens of millions of people and so forth and so on. When actually that's not the case. Absolutely not the case. And if you think about the number of Soviets who died during the Second World War, close to 30 million people, that's half the amount of people who died in the Second World War. One has to, they were facing a huge threat. I mean, that's something that one has to take into consideration. These people were not killed by communists. So when I think of a communist, I think of a party, and I don't really think of the establishment of communism. I think of the establishment of a true socialist state, or forget about true, but a socialist state that is actually providing for its population. And so I might have one time said I was a non-revisionist Marxist-Leninist, but I sort of hedged on it always because any progress is good as far as I'm concerned. So, in Kerala in India, or the CPIM in India, I think they're doing good work. Warts and all and so forth. There were mistakes that were made, especially I think in 2012 was it the year that they constructed that stuff over. I forget the precise year. I think it was 2012 when they had a construction issue that displaced a lot of people and people died. But I think that's terrible. And on the other hand, I think that just because terrible things happen that are unforeseen and not anticipated, doesn't mean that you, to use a refrain, you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Now, that refrain was used when I was a university student to refer to Western Marxism. And I'm using it to refer to actually existing socialism, which, there are 5 states that are socialist, and they comprise or compose a very large share of the global population. China, Vietnam, North Korea, not so much, and Cuba and Laos. But I think that we are going to see the end of capitalism because it cannot exist under the current terms. And I think that one should read the work of Arguri Immanuel to understand that, at least excerpts from his work to understand that concept. So all these new works by Kaito Saito and so forth on degrowth, less is more, that kind of stuff. We have to take that into consideration in the West or in the North, because we are over-consuming when the world is going to collapse as a consequence of climate changes. At the same time, is a necessity for some of these countries to develop with the correct technology.
Socialism is an irrepressible urge in the capitalist era. Simply because, like I said, after, even before 1914, there were lots of parts of the world which were relatively egalitarian societies, which reacted to capitalism by trying to resist it, in various ways. But anyway, certainly as far as development and industrialization are concerned, as we've said a couple of times already, the only way for countries to develop in this develop in a way that is roughly comparable. And I underline roughly because I don't think that countries who are developing now should try to imitate the North American lifestyle. I think it is not only very destructive, but it is also very meaningless and soulless. It doesn't actually create a better life. It may, people may have more things, but is that the purpose of life, or is it to develop the human individual as fully as possible and develop human social relations as fully as possible? So the thing is that since 1914, essentially what has happened is that we know that the only way you can develop is through some kind of socialism. And it's those countries that have been socialist that have been able to develop more or less credibly. If you are not capable of producing the political organization that revolution requires, or some sort of, and I don't necessarily think that revolutions have to come in the form of, the storming of the Bastille or the Winter Palace or what have you. They can come in a variety of forms, but unless and until, and they can take place more gradually as well. I don't have a problem with that idea. But there has to be people power. And I think that and I think there will be, because, what we are witnessing today is something quite remarkable. Even a decade ago, there was hardly a Marxist in the West to be found who would say that capitalism is exhausted. But today, the exhaustion of capitalism is so manifest that those who are still, and some of them are still saying that it is not exhausted, but they are whistling in the wind. They are not at all credible. They're clutching at straws. So we are witnessing, so if it is not the case that markets are magically going to create prosperity for all, if people finally understand that they're not going to create prosperity for all, then the only way to create prosperity is to plan it. And the only way we can plan it in such a way that benefits all of us equally, jointly, collectively, etc., is to have a political organization that is not only able to plan, but plan for both productivity and egalitarianism, which is ultimately what socialism is about.